When a group of confident black belts at Ironwell Martial Arts Academy saw 90-year-old Margaret Hale enter the gym, they dismissed her as nothing more than a frail old woman, an easy target for their arrogance and mockery. What started as casual harassment quickly escalated into a tense showdown that would leave everyone stunned. But Margaret carried a legacy few knew, a lifetime of discipline, sacrifice, and silent strength passed down to her grandson, a 7-time UFC heavyweight champion. In just minutes, this quiet grandmother would shatter their assumptions, reclaim her dignity, and deliver a powerful lesson in respect that would change the entire gym forever. Just a quick little pause before I forget. If you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, please leave a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump back in. The mid-morning sun slanted through the high windows of Ironwell Martial Arts Academy, throwing long bars of light across the polished hardwood floor. The air carried a faint tang of sweat, disinfectant, and ambition, the kind of scent that only came from hours of training. At the far end of the main mat, a cluster of students in crisp white GIs moved in sync under the command of Sensei Marco Ruiz, a broad-shouldered, 38-year-old 5th Dan black belt with a voice that could cut through noise like a blade. He was running drills with the precision of a drill sergeant, until his attention snagged on something unusual. Near the bench along the wall, a tiny woman sat quietly, her back impossibly straight for her age, her gnarled hands folded over a simple leather handbag. She wore a pale blue cardigan buttoned neatly over a white blouse, tin slacks pressed to a crease, and polished low-heeled shoes that gleamed faintly in the light. Her silver hair was tied in a perfect bun, not a strand out of place. She looked like she'd wandered in from a Sunday church service, not a combat gym. The whispering started with 2 younger black belts, Derek Tran, 26, lean and cocky, and Liam Torres, 30, built like a wrestler with a permanent smirk. "Maybe she's here for Tai Chi," Derek murmured, smirking. "Or story time," Liam chuckled, loud enough for a few others to hear. The murmurs spread like a ripple through a pond. The 90-year-old woman, Margaret Hale, didn't flinch. She simply kept her eyes on the mat, watching the drills with a focus that was unsettling in its stillness. Sensei Marco stepped forward, lips curling into a thin smile. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Are you here to watch your grandson? Or maybe you're lost?" A few snickers broke out. One of the younger students covered his mouth, trying, and failing, to hide a grin. Margaret met Marco's gaze without blinking. There was no embarrassment in her face. No protest. Just a pause. It lasted barely 2 seconds, but in that silence, the air shifted, imperceptibly to most, but enough that the laughter faltered, just a fraction. Then she gave a small nod. "I'm here for him," she said softly. No one knew yet who him was. And that would prove to be the first mistake they'd make that day. Sensei Marco tilted his head, smirk still in place. "Well then, we'll try to keep the noise down for you. Wouldn't want to scare you." The chuckles came again, low and scattered, like a pack sensing weakness. Derek, leaning against the wall, added, "Maybe she's here to sign up. We could get her a special class, gentle stretches, soft mats." Margaret said nothing. She placed her handbag on the bench beside her with careful precision, then adjusted the cuff of her cardigan. The motion was small, but her wrist caught the light. A faint, faded scar curved along the inside, not the kind left by an accident in the kitchen, but a clean, deliberate line. Surgical, controlled. Only one person noticed, Daniel Vega, a 42-year-old former Marine turned assistant instructor, standing near the heavy bag. His brow knit slightly. He knew that scar pattern. Marco stepped onto the mat and gestured toward the older students. "All right, break. Let's have some fun." He glanced at Margaret. "We'll put on a little demo for you. Show you what the young generation can do." The black belts squared up, their movements sharp, rehearsed. Kicks cracked against the air. Shouts echoed off the walls. Margaret watched without blinking, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. Her eyes were somewhere else entirely. Derek swaggered closer. "You impressed, Grandma?" Margaret's gaze finally shifted to him. Her tone was gentle, almost apologetic. "Form without balance is nothing." The room went quiet for a second. Then the laughter roared back, louder than before. Liam clapped Derek on the shoulder, grinning. But Daniel kept his eyes on her, that scar still in his mind. Marco gestured toward the center of the mat. "Why don't you show us what balance looks like, then?" It was meant as a joke. Everyone knew it. Margaret simply looked at him and waited. That pause, that absolute stillness, wasn't frailty. It was control. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't sure this was going to be funny at all. Marco's challenge still hung in the air, a casual jab meant to get another laugh out of the room. But the woman didn't move. Margaret sat there, posture unyielding, hands lightly folded over her knee. Her breathing was steady, too steady. Not the shallow, quick breaths of someone rattled by embarrassment. Each inhale and exhale was deliberate, measured, almost trained. Daniel Vega's eyes narrowed. He'd seen that kind of breathing before, not in dojos, but in places where composure under pressure meant the difference between life and death. "Come on, it's just for fun," Marco said, smiling wide enough for the crowd. But something in his voice carried a flicker of irritation at her lack of reaction. Margaret's gaze drifted over the room. It wasn't aimless. She scanned it, taking in exits, mirrors, spacing between students, the way a tactician might assess a field before a move. Her eyes paused briefly on a framed poster high on the wall. "Discipline above all." Then she looked back to Marco. "Fun is for those who can afford mistakes," she said softly. A few students snickered again, though less certain this time. The gym's front door creaked open, letting in a shaft of sunlight. A courier stepped inside, scanning the room. "Delivery for Margaret Hale." She rose without hesitation. Her movements were unhurried but fluid, her balance perfect despite her age. She accepted the small, wrapped parcel with a quiet "thank you" and set it on the bench. The paper tore with a soft rip, revealing a wooden box polished to a deep sheen. She opened it just far enough for Daniel, and only Daniel, to glimpse what was inside. A folded, crimson cloth with a patch stitched in black and gold. The design was unmistakable, a crest he hadn't seen in over 20 years, belonging to a now-defunct military close combat program that was whispered about more than documented. She closed the box and placed it gently in her bag. When she sat back down, her eyes returned to the mat, calm, patient, and utterly unshaken. Daniel's chest felt tight. Whatever this woman's story was, it didn't belong in the middle of a joke. The laughter moved on without her, rolling around the room like an easy habit. But Margaret knew the sound for what it was. A mask, the same kind she had seen on young recruits decades ago when fear needed somewhere to hide. She kept her eyes on the mat, her face unreadable. Inside, though, her thoughts drifted like slow currents. It had been 71 years since she first stepped onto a training floor, not for sport, but for survival. Back then, she'd been 18, wearing fatigues far too big for her frame, learning from men who'd fought in wars she was too young to fully understand. They'd taught her that silence could be armor, that sometimes the loudest answer was the one you didn't give. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead pulled her back to the present. She studied Marco's stance as he demonstrated a throw, weight distributed forward, grip too tight. Good for intimidation, poor for recovery. Her right knee ached in the familiar way it always did when rain was coming, but she didn't adjust her position. To shift would have been to show discomfort, and she had learned long ago that comfort was a luxury you never displayed to those testing your limits. A stray lock of silver hair slipped loose from her bun, brushing her cheek. She tucked it back neatly, eyes never leaving the floor exercises. From the far side of the room, Daniel Vega's gaze stayed fixed on her. He recognized that discipline. Not the kind you faked for a belt test, but the kind that was welded into you by years of unbroken expectation. Margaret didn't look back at him. She didn't need to. She knew exactly who was paying attention now. When Liam Torres swaggered by again, his GI top loose and his smirk intact, she offered the faintest smile. Not warmth, not mockery, just acknowledgement. And in that smallest exchange, Liam felt a strange hitch in his chest. He couldn't have explained why, but the smile unsettled him more than any glare could have. From his spot by the heavy bag, Daniel Vega found himself watching the older woman more than the drills on the mat. It wasn't just the scar or the steady breathing anymore. It was the stillness. People her age fidgeted, crossed their arms, shifted their weight. Margaret Hale might as well have been carved in stone. Two white belt students, Rachel Kim, 19, and Evan Ross, 22, had been leaning against the far wall between rounds. They'd joined in the chuckling earlier, if only because everyone else had. But now, they exchanged a quick glance. Rachel's voice was a whisper. She doesn't seem, fragile. Evan shrugged, though his eyes stayed on her. I don't know. My grandma's 92. She can't sit like that for 5 minutes. On the mat, Marco was running a mock spar between Derek and Liam. Exaggerated strikes, flashy sweeps, keeping the crowd entertained. But Daniel noticed something Margaret was doing that no one else seemed to. She was tracking each exchange, not with her head, but with her eyes. Her gaze followed every shift in balance, every foot pivot, as if she could see the holes in their defense before they did. When Derek stumbled slightly after overcommitting to a kick, Margaret's eyes narrowed just a fraction. It was enough for Daniel to think. She saw that coming before he even moved. Near the front desk, Tina Morales, the gym's receptionist, was sorting paperwork but had started sneaking glances over. She didn't know much about martial arts beyond what she saw here, but something about the way Daniel kept watching the old woman had her paying attention too. The laughter was still there, but it was softer now, no longer unchallenged. Marco, sensing a shift, decided to push it further. All right. Let's give the lady a real treat. Derek, Liam, show her some close-quarters work. Daniel felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. This wasn't going to stay playful much longer. Margaret, however, simply adjusted her hands in her lap, eyes never leaving the center of the mat. If she was worried, she had a peculiar way of hiding it, by looking exactly the same as she had when she first walked in. Derek and Liam circled each other at the center of the mat, putting on a little extra swagger now that the audience had been clearly defined. They moved fast, trading grips and quick hip throws, slapping the mat for effect each time they landed. The newer students clapped along at first, but it was hesitant, like applause for a performance they weren't entirely sure they should enjoy. Rachel Kim kept her eyes on Margaret, frowning slightly. She hasn't blinked in, like, forever. Evan chuckled under his breath. Yeah, but not like a creepy way. More like, she's waiting for something. At the desk, Tina Morales stopped pretending to shuffle papers. She leaned on the counter now, her chin resting on one hand, watching the old woman with the kind of curiosity that builds without your permission. Daniel Vega's arms were crossed, his jaw set. He had no proof of what his gut was telling him, but the list in his mind was growing. The scar, the breathing, the way she scanned the room, the eyes, tracking footwork instead of flashy moves. Marco clapped his hands. All right, gentlemen, let's bring the heat. Show her what real black belts can do. Derek threw a quick combination, forcing Liam back a step. They exchanged a grin, feeding off each other now. But they didn't see what Daniel saw. Each time they tangled up, Margaret's gaze flicked to the offhand position, the hips, the weight shift. She wasn't impressed. She was assessing. Rachel spoke up before she could stop herself. She's not watching them like a spectator. Evan glanced at her. Then how? Rachel hesitated, eyes still fixed on the old woman, like a coach who already knows how the fight ends. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the slap of Liam hitting the mat again. Marco smiled wide, still playing to the room. Your turn next, ma'am? Margaret gave no answer. She just adjusted her seat slightly, not away from the mat, but forward, as though settling in for something inevitable. Daniel's stomach tightened. Whatever was coming, it was no joke anymore. Derek and Liam circled each other at the center of the mat, putting on a little extra swagger now that the audience had been clearly defined. They moved fast, trading grips and quick hip throws, slapping the mat for effect each time they landed. The newer students clapped along at first, but it was hesitant, like applause for a performance they weren't entirely sure they should enjoy. Rachel Kim kept her eyes on Margaret, frowning slightly. She hasn't blinked in, like, forever. Evan chuckled under his breath. Yeah, but not like a creepy way. More like, she's waiting for something. At the desk, Tina Morales stopped pretending to shuffle papers. She leaned on the counter now, her chin resting on one hand, watching the old woman with the kind of curiosity that builds without your permission. Daniel Vega's arms were crossed, his jaw set. He had no proof of what his gut was telling him, but the list in his mind was growing. The scar, the breathing, the way she scanned the room, the eyes, tracking footwork instead of flashy moves. Marco clapped his hands. All right, gentlemen, let's bring the heat. Show her what real black belts can do. Derek threw a quick combination, forcing Liam back a step. They exchanged a grin, feeding off each other now. But they didn't see what Daniel saw. Each time they tangled up, Margaret's gaze flicked to the offhand position, the hips, the weight shift. She wasn't impressed. She was assessing. Rachel spoke up before she could stop herself. She's not watching them like a spectator. Evan glanced at her. Then how? Rachel hesitated, eyes still fixed on the old woman, like a coach who already knows how the fight ends. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the slap of Liam hitting the mat again. Marco smiled wide, still playing to the room. Your turn next, ma'am? Margaret gave no answer. She just adjusted her seat slightly, not away from the mat, but forward, as though settling in for something inevitable. Daniel's stomach tightened. Whatever was coming, it was no joke anymore. The sound that set it off wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a roar or a crash. It was the sharp snap of Derek's belt whipping as he pivoted for a throw, a clean, taut sound that sliced through the gym's air. Margaret's eyes blinked once, and for the briefest moment, the polished hardwood beneath her faded. She was somewhere else entirely. A narrow courtyard, half a world away. Dust underfoot, the scent of iron heavy in the air. A young man in fatigues, barely older than the students here, adjusting the knot on his belt before stepping into the circle. His hands shook, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. Ma'am, just tell me I'm ready. The memory fractured at the edges, fading back into the clean, bright lines of Iron Will Martial Arts Academy. She adjusted her cardigan sleeve and exhaled slowly. That breathing, the same Daniel kept noticing, wasn't just habit. It was how she came back from places her mind wandered to without warning. Rachel, still watching from across the room, caught the smallest thing. When Margaret's hand fell back into her lap, her fingers closed into a half fist, knuckles pressing against her palm in a way that looked practiced. Liam Torres threw Derek into a controlled fall, both of them popping up grinning. That's balance, Grandma. Derek called out, loud enough for the laugh it got. Margaret's gaze met his for a moment, and this time she let the silence stretch, long enough that even Liam shifted his stance slightly. Tina Morales, still leaning on the counter, tilted her head. She's not intimidated. At all. Daniel finally stepped away from the heavy bag, moving closer to the bench where Margaret sat. He didn't speak, just took a position where he could see both her and the mat. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew the look in her eyes. He'd seen it before in veterans who'd been through things they never spoke of in polite company. And he was starting to suspect the black belts were playing a game they didn't understand. Daniel stood with his arms folded, eyes flicking between the mat and the woman on the bench. The room wasn't laughing quite as easily anymore. The chuckles came in smaller bursts now, quickly dying in the air. Rachel Kim had moved closer to the front of the group, curiosity outweighing her desire to blend in. She noticed something when Margaret adjusted her posture again. The cuff of her cardigan rode up, revealing not just the old scar Daniel had seen earlier, but a faint, almost invisible line of raised skin along the back of her forearm. Not accidental. Not recent. The kind of mark you didn't get in civilian life. Evan Ross spotted it too and muttered, "That's not from gardening." On the mat, Marco Ruiz decided to play to the crowd again. You know, in my culture, elders get respect, but they also have to earn it here. Maybe we should let her prove she belongs. Derek grinned. Oh, I'll volunteer for that. Margaret didn't even turn her head toward them. She was watching the space between Derek's feet, noting the slight outward turn of his lead foot, the same flaw she'd seen in dozens of trainees long ago. For a moment, she saw another pair of boots in that stance. Mud on the toes. The trembling of a soldier who'd been awake for 72 hours straight. She remembered the way she'd knelt, adjusting his position with 2 fingers and telling him, "Your balance is your breath. Lose one, you lose the other." Her gaze softened almost imperceptibly at the memory, but when her eyes refocused on Derek, it was gone, replaced by the same steady, unreadable mask. Daniel caught that flicker. Not just the softness, but the discipline that snapped back into place immediately after. Tina Morales spoke under her breath to Rachel. "She's somebody. I don't know who, but..." Rachel finished the thought for her. "But we're all going to find out." The black belts still thought the show was theirs. They hadn't realized yet that the room was already turning toward her. The sound of bare feet padding on the mat filled the space between the fading laughter. Derek was stretching his neck, loosening his shoulders, already picturing whatever easy when he thought he'd get. Margaret shifted slightly, leaning forward just enough for the strap of her handbag to slide down her arm. The bag hit the floor with a muted thud, heavy for its size. Something metallic peeked out from the unzipped side pocket. A small, oval tag on a ball chain, edges worn smooth. Daniel's breath caught for half a second. Not just any dog tag. The lettering style, the dull finish, the telltale crease from years of wear. It wasn't a copy or a fashion piece. That was issued. Rachel saw it too. Is that? She started. Daniel shot her a look that stopped her from finishing. His voice dropped low. Don't say it unless you're sure. Marco, oblivious, called out from the mat. Come on, Mrs. Benton. Or should I say, Grandma Champ. His friends laughed again, but it was a weaker sound now, like even they felt the air thickening. Margaret simply bent down, tucked the tag back into her bag, and pulled the zipper closed with deliberate slowness. Evan Ross's brow furrowed. Benton, Benton, he muttered it again, trying to place it. He'd heard that name somewhere. Not in town, not in casual talk, in headlines. Years ago. But before he could land on it, Derek clapped his hands loudly and said, Let's go. I'm ready when you are. Margaret looked at him for the first time in full, eyes steady, chin level, and said nothing. But something in that look made Liam Torres unconsciously take half a step back, even though he wasn't the one being stared at. Daniel exhaled through his nose. He knew exactly what was coming, even if the rest of them didn't yet. And whatever it was about to put the whole room on notice. The atmosphere in Ironwool Martial Arts Academy had changed dramatically. The earlier light-hearted jeers and careless laughter were now swallowed by a dense silence that pressed down on everyone present. The air felt thick, as if even the sunlight filtering through the high windows hesitated to fall fully on the mat. Derek Tran cracked his knuckles, his confident grin now edged with uncertainty. The swagger that had marked his every step since Margaret arrived was fading. All right, Grandma Benton, he said, voice loud enough to fill the room, but lacking the earlier cockiness. If you really want to show us what you've got, then let's see it. Liam Torres, standing close beside Derek, tried to hide his growing nervousness behind a forced smirk. No backing out now, he added, though the words came out more like a plea than a challenge. Margaret rose slowly from the bench. Her movements carried the grace of decades, but also the unmistakable weight of a century's worth of unspoken stories. The cardigan she wore shifted softly, the pale blue fabric hugging her slight frame as she stood with unyielding poise. Her silver hair was still impeccably tied in that neat bun, and her eyes, steady and unflinching, locked onto Derek's without a trace of fear or hesitation. When this is over, she said in a calm, measured tone that commanded the room's attention, you will apologize. To me, and to everyone here. Her words did not carry anger, nor did they threaten violence. Instead, they bore the quiet force of absolute certainty. The kind of promise spoken by someone who has seen too much to waste energy on empty threats, and who understands the weight of honor more deeply than most. A ripple passed through the crowd. Some exchanged uneasy glances, others swallowed hard, their bravado cracking. Even Sensei Marco's lips twitched in a faint, knowing smile, one not born of amusement, but respect for the dignity Margaret radiated. Marco stepped forward, folding his arms across his broad chest. Fair enough, he said, voice calm but resolute. We'll all be watching. His eyes flicked briefly to the rest of the room, where students and bystanders alike were leaning in, sensing that the moment was far beyond mere demonstration. Daniel Vega moved quietly to stand beside Margaret, his presence protective but unobtrusive. He knew the history hinted at by the faded scar on her wrist, the controlled breath, the unwavering gaze. He had seen this kind of resolve before, in veterans who carried battlefields behind their eyes, in survivors who had endured more than anyone in this room could imagine. Rachel Kim, standing near the front, whispered softly, almost to herself, "This isn't just a show anymore." Margaret adjusted her cardigan sleeve again, the faint scar tracing a pale line along her wrist catching the light. It was a small but potent symbol of battles long past and victories quietly won. She inhaled deeply, the slow, deliberate breath anchoring her in the present. The room seemed to contract around her stillness, the tension building like a drawn bowstring ready to release. This was no longer about youthful bravado or mockery. It was about respect, about truth, about the silent strength that demanded to be seen. The moment had come. The gym seemed to hold its breath. The usual noises, the slap of GI against GI, the steady rhythm of feet on polished wood, the low murmur of casual conversation, all faded into an uneasy silence. Margaret Hale, the small, silver-haired woman who had sat quietly on the bench just moments before, now stood alone in the center of the mat. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, and yet she moved as if the world outside that moment did not exist. Her footsteps were soft but purposeful, the weight of each step measured and unyielding. The air seemed thicker somehow, charged with anticipation. Even the sunlight filtering through the tall windows appeared to dim as though nature itself was acknowledging the gravity settling into the room. Derek Tran shifted nervously, trying to rally his confidence. His earlier cocky grin had faded, replaced by a flicker of doubt he couldn't shake. He looked at Margaret again and noticed something he hadn't before. The way her spine held itself, straight as a soldier's at attention. The subtle control in her shoulders, relaxed yet ready to spring into motion. The quiet intensity in her eyes that burned steadily like a low flame. Margaret's hands hung loosely at her sides, but Daniel Vega, standing just behind her, recognized the tension beneath that stillness. The quiet readiness born of years spent in environments where hesitation could cost lives. His gaze swept the room and caught the looks exchanged between the black belts. Their bravado, once so bold, was now cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Liam's smirk was gone. Derek's jaw was tight. Even Sensei Marco wore an expression that mixed respect with a trace of apprehension. Rachel Kim's fingers twitched at her side, her breath catching as she whispered, "She's not here to play." Evan Ross nodded, voice low. "I've never seen anyone move with that kind of control who hadn't been training their whole life." Margaret's eyes slowly scanned the room, not with arrogance or challenge, but with quiet acceptance of what was coming. The faint scars visible on her wrist caught the light, along with the hint of a dog tag tucked away in her bag, symbols of a history the crowd was only beginning to sense. Time seemed to stretch. The usual restless shifting of feet slowed to a near halt. Conversations died. All that remained was the stillness, the calm before the storm. Marco stepped aside with a measured nod. "Whenever you're ready," he said quietly, his voice steady but carrying the weight of what the moment meant. Margaret lowered herself into a stance, subtle, understated, but unmistakably skilled. Her posture spoke volumes, disciplined, poised, and ready to reclaim a dignity long denied. The room waited. Hearts thudded in the silence. And for the first time, the black belts, the students, and everyone watching realized the woman they had dismissed was about to change everything. Margaret's feet pressed firmly against the polished wood floor of Iron Will Martial Arts Academy. Each movement was deliberate, measured, embodying a balance honed by decades of training and hardship. Her stance was low but perfectly centered, the kind that seemed effortless but concealed immense power beneath its quiet surface. In that moment, she became the calm eye within a gathering storm. The atmosphere in the gym thickened, heavy with anticipation. The murmurs and restless shifting that had filled the space earlier were replaced by a profound silence, a silence that wrapped around every person in the room like a tangible presence. The usual background sounds, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant scrape of sneakers, all faded into nothing. Daniel Vega's gaze remained fixed on Margaret, a silent sentinel in this charged moment. His military instincts were on high alert, recognizing something far beyond the ordinary in this elderly woman's poised stillness. He had seen this quiet before, in soldiers waiting for orders, in veterans ready to face an unseen threat. There was a depth of experience, a weight of history in her presence that was undeniable. Around the room, the younger students shifted uncomfortably. Rachel Kim's hands clenched and unclenched at her sides, her eyes wide and fixed on Margaret's unwavering form. Evan Ross exchanged nervous glances with others, his earlier bravado extinguished by the gravity of the moment. The black belts, once so confident, now wore expressions edged with respect and apprehension. Margaret's eyes scanned the room, sharp and calculating. She noted the subtle flaws in Derek Tran's posture, the slight forward lean that could be exploited, the The grip Liam Torres held a fraction too tight on his GI. These were details invisible to most, but not to her. Her assessment was silent but thorough, like a tactician mapping a battlefield before the first move. Sensei Marco Ruiz, sensing the shift in energy, lowered his voice and addressed the room softly. This is no longer just a demonstration. This is a lesson in respect, discipline, and truth. Light streamed through the tall windows, casting long, stretching shadows across the mat. Those shadows seemed to reach toward Margaret as if drawn by the quiet intensity she radiated. Her breathing was steady, chest rising and falling in slow, controlled cycles, the rhythm of a lifetime spent mastering both body and mind. The faint scar on her wrist caught the light once again, a small but powerful reminder of battles fought in silence, victories earned far from any spotlight or crowd. Daniel stepped closer, positioning himself beside her, a protective presence but careful not to overshadow her moment. The distant ticking of a clock filled the room, each second stretching longer, the air thick with waiting. Then, without haste but with unmistakable intent, Margaret shifted her weight, sinking deeper into her stance. Her presence filled the room, quiet, commanding, unyielding. Like a still lake before a storm's first ripple, she was poised to transform stillness into power. The room waited. Time seemed suspended, and the moment was almost here. The polished floor beneath Margaret's feet reflected the soft light filtering through the gym's tall windows, yet the shimmer could not soften the electric tension that had settled over Ironwool Martial Arts Academy. Every eye was drawn to her, the quiet woman who now stood alone on the mat, a figure of calm strength surrounded by an unsettled crowd. Her stance was impeccable, feet planted firmly, slightly wider than shoulder-width apart, knees bent just enough to offer both stability and fluidity. Every muscle in her body was taut but controlled, like a bowstring pulled back, ready to release energy in perfect measure. The movement, or lack of it, spoke volumes. There was no wasted effort, no false bravado, only purpose. Daniel Vega's gaze never wavered as he watched her. Years of service had trained him to read the subtlest of tells, and Margaret's eyes told a story all their own. They flicked with precision, not in haste, but with a measured certainty, scanning Derek's feet, measuring his balance, noticing the tiny shifts in Liam's stance. Each detail was catalogued silently, the mental map of a seasoned tactician unfolding. Across the room, the black belts fidgeted under her scrutiny. What had started as a casual display of skill had turned into an unspoken reckoning. Their earlier confidence now cracked, replaced with an undercurrent of tension and a grudging respect. Derek's jaw tightened, his usual smirk replaced by a wary line. Liam's eyes darted nervously, betraying his unease. Near the sidelines, Rachel Kim edged closer to Evan Ross, whispering with a mix of awe and disbelief. She moves like she's lived every second of training she's ever done. There's no hesitation, no uncertainty. Evan nodded slowly, voice hushed. It's like every movement is a lesson learned the hard way. No wasted motion, no guesswork. She's in complete control. Margaret's gaze lifted, locking onto Derek with a steady, unyielding calm. It wasn't a challenge shouted or a taunt. It was a quiet command that spoke more powerfully than any words could. This is not a game. The gym seemed to contract around her, the usual noises fading into silence. The distant hum of the ventilation system, the shuffling of feet, even the rustle of clothing, all faded beneath the weight of the moment. Marco Ruiz, sensing the crescendo, stepped back deliberately, clearing the space around Margaret while never breaking eye contact. His voice was calm, but carried unmistakable weight. Show us what you're ready for, when you're ready. Margaret lowered herself slightly into a deeper stance, the subtle movement signaling an end to patience. She was prepared, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Every fiber of her being was focused, a quiet storm gathering strength. The room exhaled as one, holding its breath for what was about to unfold. In that suspended silence, Margaret became the loudest presence in the room. And in that stillness, the promise of change was undeniable. Margaret's breath deepened, slow and deliberate. Each inhale a quiet claim of control, each exhale a steady release of tension that seemed to ripple through the room. Her posture, rooted like an ancient oak yet fluid as flowing water, reflected decades of unyielding discipline and countless battles won far from the public eye. The polished hardwood beneath her feet bore the weight of history in that moment, a stage for a silent reckoning. Around the gym, the black belts shifted nervously. Derek's fingers twitched at his sides, betraying the uncertainty hidden beneath his bravado. Liam's eyes flickered in rapid, restless motions, searching for any sign of weakness but finding none. Even Marco Ruiz, the stoic instructor, exhibited a rare flicker of apprehension, his composed exterior revealing the gravity he sensed. The early confidence that had fueled their mockery now gave way to a grudging respect, mixed with the unmistakable hint of doubt. Daniel Vega stood close by Margaret, his presence a silent guard, yet more a witness to the significance of what was about to unfold. His own breathing slowed, syncing almost instinctively with hers, a shared rhythm born of instinct, respect, and readiness. Across the gym, Rachel Kim and Evan Ross exchanged glances heavy with realization, their youthful awe tempered by the sobering truth settling in their hearts. This was no ordinary display of skill or a casual sparring match. It was a profound moment of truth and reclaiming. Margaret's eyes locked with Derek's again, the unspoken message between them as heavy as the still air. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The game was over. The pretense had fallen away, revealing something far more real and unyielding. She shifted her weight subtly, the muscles beneath her cardigan coiling with precision, poised not for reckless attack, but for commanding space with unerring grace and control. Time itself seemed to slow, each second stretching, hanging suspended like a held breath in a quiet room. Then, with quiet determination, Margaret took the first measured step forward, an assertion of dignity, of history, and of undeniable presence. Margaret's first movement was almost imperceptible, a slight shift of weight, a subtle tightening of muscles beneath the soft fabric of her cardigan, so delicate that many in the room almost missed it. Yet in that instant, everything changed. The air thickened with anticipation, and every eye locked on her, sensing the surge of energy concealed within decades of quiet discipline. Derek Tran, still clinging to the last remnants of his confidence, lunged forward with a swift strike. His motion was sharp, fast, aimed to overwhelm. But Margaret was already several beats ahead, her body anticipating his move with uncanny precision. Her response was fluid and controlled, executed with the grace only a lifetime of training could forge. She sidestepped effortlessly, guiding his momentum like a skilled tactician redirecting an enemy's charge. A gentle, almost effortless twist of her wrist sent Derek stumbling, the force enough to unbalance but never to harm. He crashed onto the polished mat, stunned, breath knocked out of rhythm, his arrogance shattered but his body untouched. A profound silence enveloped the gym. The shocked disbelief hung like a heavy curtain, suffocating the once boisterous crowd. No one moved. No one dared to break the stillness. Derek's ragged inhale was the only sound, a quiet testament to the shock reverberating through him and everyone watching. Margaret remained rooted, her posture unwavering, radiating a quiet strength that transcended the physical. She did not shout, did not boast. Her dignity was palpable, a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. Slowly, realization dawned on the faces around her. Liam's eyes widened, his voice barely above a whisper. That's Margaret Hale. Rachel's breath caught, her voice trembling as the pieces clicked into place. The same Margaret Hale, the grandmother of the 7-time heavyweight UFC champion. Daniel nodded solemnly, the recognition clear in his eyes. The legacy that had been hidden beneath years of silence and humility now thundered across the room with undeniable force. Marco Ruiz stepped forward, breaking the heavy silence with a steady voice filled with reverence. No more doubts. No more disrespect. Margaret's gaze swept the room one last time. Calm, resolute, commanding. No words were necessary. Her presence, her skill, and her quiet dignity spoke volumes, forever changing the way everyone saw her. The gym remained enveloped in an almost sacred silence, every breath held captive by the weight of what had just unfolded. Derek lay sprawled on the polished mat, chest rising and falling unevenly as he grappled with a shock deeper than any physical blow. Defeat was never supposed to come from someone like Margaret Hale, not just a woman many years his senior, but a quiet figure whose presence had shattered every assumption he and his peers had held. No one dared to break the stillness. No voices rose in triumph or mockery. Instead, the room seemed to hum with an electric mix of disbelief and reverence. Margaret stood motionless, tall and poised. The quiet aftershock of her movement echoed louder than any shout could have. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, scanned the crowd and met the gaze of every witness, silently communicating a dignity that needed no words. There was no gloating, no need to revel in victory, only a serene reclamation of respect long denied. From the back of the room, a murmur began, soft at first, like a thread pulling through the air, then growing with steady insistence. Margaret Hale. The name floated through the gym, reverberating like the awakening of a long-forgotten legend. Rachel Kim's voice trembled with awe as she leaned closer to Evan. Her grandson, the 7-time UFC heavyweight champion. They say he learned everything from her. Every technique, every lesson. Her eyes were wide, filled with newfound admiration. Daniel Vega's expression softened, the respect deepening in his eyes. She carried that legacy quietly, like a shadow. Now everyone here sees why. Marco Ruiz, the stoic instructor, stepped forward, his voice steady and reverent as he addressed the room. This wasn't about showing off skill. It was a lesson, one in honor, resilience, and respect. Slowly, Derek pushed himself up onto his knees. His head hung low, not in anger or defiance, but in reluctant acceptance. His voice, rough and barely audible, broke the silence. I was wrong. You deserve that apology. Margaret inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, accepting the gesture without a word. Her silence spoke volumes, strength without arrogance, power without cruelty. In that moment, dignity was restored. The crowd shifted, transformed. What began as mockery had ended in reverence, a powerful reminder of humility and the true meaning of strength. In the stillness that followed, a legacy was honored, not through noise, but through presence. The stunned silence hung heavy in the gym, a thick veil that seemed to stretch time itself. Every person present was caught in the aftermath of Margaret's quiet but absolute demonstration of skill. Yet beneath that silence, something else began to stir, a slow, dawning awareness that rippled through the crowd like a tide pulling back to reveal hidden depths. Rachel Kim was the first to break the stillness. Her voice was low, trembling with a mixture of awe and reverence. That's Margaret Hale, the grandmother of Marcus Hale, the 7-time UFC heavyweight champion. The name passed from lips to ears, carried in whispers that filled the room with a new energy. The realization was like a key turning in a lock, suddenly making sense of the subtle clues scattered throughout the morning. The worn dog tags tucked away in Margaret's bag, the faint scars on her wrists, the steely precision in her stance. All pieces of a hidden legacy finally laid bare. Daniel Vega's expression softened as he stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with conviction. She's more than just a fighter. She's a pioneer, a champion who shaped one of the greatest fighters of our time. Marcus learned everything from her, from the first stance to the last fight. Liam Torres, still shaken, swallowed hard, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and newfound respect. We judged her, without knowing her story. We thought she was just an old woman. We were wrong. Marco Ruiz nodded solemnly, folding his arms with a look of deep respect. This moment isn't just about skill. It's about humility, honor, and understanding that strength is often quiet, and power doesn't need to shout to be heard. Margaret offered a small, serene smile, one not of triumph or pride, but of quiet peace. Her battles had never been about attention or glory. Her legacy was carried in silence, passed through generations like a sacred trust. Today, that trust was honored openly for the first time. The atmosphere in the gym shifted completely. What had begun as mockery and dismissal transformed into reverence and reflection. Students approached cautiously, their faces softened by respect, some offering apologies, others simply nodding in quiet acknowledgement. The story of Marcus Hale's grandmother, of a woman who embodied strength, dignity, and resilience, had become a living lesson. It was a reminder that true power is not loud or boastful. It is silent, steadfast, and commands respect through presence alone. As the crowd slowly dispersed, many glanced back at Margaret, their perspectives forever changed. She hadn't needed to say a word. Her presence, her history, and her grace had spoken louder than any voice ever could. The silence that followed Margaret's quiet yet undeniable victory stretched long, settling over the gym like a heavy cloak. The tension that had gripped everyone since the beginning slowly began to unravel, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. Derek, once brash and cocky, remained kneeling on the polished mat, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. His eyes, now wide with a mixture of shock and realization, flicked nervously to the faces surrounding him. Faces that had once been filled with doubt and mockery, now softened with respect and understanding. Finally, his voice broke through the stillness, low and hesitant, but carrying a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. I underestimated you. I was wrong to mock you, to think you were just a frail old woman. Each word seemed to carry the weight of regret, and his tone held no trace of arrogance, only the raw admission of a hard lesson learned. Liam Torres stepped forward, voice quieter but no less sincere, nodding in agreement. We all were. It's a lesson we needed to learn. His eyes met Margaret's briefly, conveying respect and apology without the need for further words. Margaret's gaze remained steady and unyielding. She said nothing, her silence a powerful statement in itself. Her presence spoke louder than any speech, a dignified reminder that strength is often quiet, that true power lies not in words, but in action and restraint. Marco Ruiz, the instructor, raised his voice, breaking the heavy silence with calm authority. This is what respect looks like, not just winning a fight, but owning your mistakes and learning from them. His words resonated deeply, sinking into the hearts of the students and onlookers alike. Around them, the students absorbed the lesson with wide eyes and contemplative expressions. Rachel whispered to Evan, "This will change everything, for them and for everyone who hears about this." Evan nodded slowly, the magnitude of the moment settling in. Daniel Vega approached Derek quietly and extended a firm hand. Derek accepted, rising slowly, his posture now transformed from arrogance to humility, a subtle but profound shift in character. The gym itself felt different, charged with a quiet reverence, a collective growth born from witnessing dignity reclaimed through grace and skill. Margaret's legacy, once hidden beneath years of silence and humility, now stood unmistakably in the light. It was a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured by noise or aggression, but by resilience, dignity, and the courage to rise above. As the crowd began to disperse, many lingered to offer quiet thanks and respectful nods, their minds forever changed by the day's lesson. In that moment, transformation had taken root, not just in Derek and his peers, but in every person who had witnessed the quiet reclaiming of true strength. True strength had been revealed. Margaret stepped off the mat with the quiet assurance of someone who had lived through battles far greater than the one just fought. Each movement was deliberate and measured, carrying the weight of decades of discipline and experience. The tension that had gripped the room began to dissolve, replaced by a respectful hush that spread like a wave through the assembled crowd. Her victory required no boast, no raised voice. Her presence alone spoke volumes. The room remained still, many faces still absorbing the profound shift in understanding. Some were softened by regret, the sting of their earlier misjudgments settling heavily. Others were touched by awe and admiration, as if witnessing something sacred unveiled. All, however, were changed, transformed by the undeniable truth of what they had seen. Derek, who had moments before been the epitome of arrogance, remained seated on the mat, humbled beyond words. The cocky bravado that once filled his gaze had been replaced with thoughtful silence. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to meet Margaret's, offering a subtle nod, a silent gesture acknowledging not only her strength but his own failings. Margaret returned his look with a calm and steady gaze. There was no bitterness or triumph in her eyes, only a gentle, unwavering dignity. "Strength," she said quietly, her voice steady and clear, "is not about overpowering others. It's about standing with integrity, especially when no one is watching." Her words hung in the air, rippling through the gym like a quiet but powerful current. The crowd fell into a thoughtful silence, the lesson settling deep in their hearts where it would resonate far beyond this moment. Marco Ruiz stepped forward, his voice warm and resolute as he addressed the group. What we witnessed today is far more than skill. It's a lesson in humility, respect, and the quiet power of resilience. Let us carry that forward. Rachel and Evan exchanged meaningful glances, their young faces reflecting the gravity of the day's events. They had seen strength stripped to its purest form, and the impact was unmistakable. As Margaret gathered her belongings with her usual calm grace, several students approached quietly, their expressions softened by respect and remorse. They offered thanks and apologies, each encounter met with a nod, a brief smile, and a few sincere words of encouragement. Her humility shone as brightly as her strength. Outside the gym, Daniel Vega waited patiently, a silent guardian and living testament to the legacy Margaret carried. Together, they stepped into the afternoon light, leaving behind a space forever changed. The lesson lingered long after they had gone. True strength is silent. Dignity does not demand attention. It earns it, quietly and with unwavering grace. 3 months had passed since that unforgettable morning at Iron Will Martial Arts Academy. But the memory of Margaret Hale's quiet reclaiming of dignity still resonated deeply within the gym's walls. The once tense atmosphere had shifted, evolving into something richer, a culture defined by respect, humility, and an understanding that true strength often speaks without words. Near the entrance, a framed photograph caught the eyes of every visitor. Margaret standing side by side with her grandson, Marcus Hale, the 7-time UFC heavyweight champion. Their smiles were subtle but proud, a testament to a legacy forged in silence and perseverance. It was more than a picture. It was a symbol of endurance, discipline, and honor passed from one generation to the next. Margaret had returned not as an outsider, but as a mentor and guide. Dressed simply in comfortable training attire, she moved through the gym with quiet confidence, correcting stances, offering gentle encouragement, and reminding her students that strength was as much about inner resolve as physical prowess. Her presence was a steady anchor for the class, a living embodiment of the lesson she had imparted so powerfully that day. Derek Tran, transformed by humility and newfound respect, trained harder than ever before. His previous arrogance was replaced by a sincere dedication, his eyes often seeking Margaret's approval. Their relationship, once marked by conflict, had evolved into one of quiet respect and mentorship. He no longer saw her as a challenge to be defeated, but as a teacher whose lessons extended far beyond martial arts. The gym itself had changed in subtle but profound ways. Walls that once echoed with impatience and brash competition now hummed with focused energy and mutual support. Students moved with purpose, embodying the dignity and discipline Margaret's story had inspired. One afternoon, as the class came to a close, Margaret stood quietly by the entrance, watching her students bow and file out. Daniel Vega approached her with a soft smile, pride evident in his eyes. "Your legacy is growing," he said gently. Margaret nodded, her gaze steady and thoughtful. True strength is silent. Dignity doesn't demand attention, it earns it. Outside, the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the gym's facade. Those shadows carried the weight of history, honor, and the promise of a future shaped by quiet resilience and unwavering grace. Margaret Hale's story was no longer hidden. It had become a living testament, a beacon for all who understood that the greatest battles are often fought not with noise or spectacle, but with silent strength and steadfast dignity. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.